Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving deep into the hidden psychology of one of literature's most infamous characters to ask a really profound, very modern question. I am absolutely thrilled to unpack this with you all because, honestly, we aren't just looking at a classic piece of literature here. We're looking at a complete masterclass in human behavior. We're going to peel back the layers of a story you probably think you already know, just to reveal something that is incredibly relevant to our lives right now.
So, what makes a monster? I want you to literally hold someone in your mind for a second, maybe someone in your own life or a figure out there in the world right now that you've labeled as difficult, cruel, or just completely unreasonable. Got 'em? Good. Because to truly understand them and to really grasp the nature of cruelty itself, we have to look way beneath the surface. We have to start asking, well, what happened to them before this moment? What were they protecting? What had already been taken from them?
All right, let's jump right into Part 1, The Pound of Flesh, a 1596 courtroom drama. On the surface, sure, it's a gruesome legal thriller. Antonio, a Christian merchant, borrows money from Shylock, a Jewish moneylender who is completely despised by the society around him. And the bizarre, frankly terrifying terms of this loan? If Antonio defaults, Shylock legally gets to take a literal pound of his flesh. But underneath that sensational plot, it's actually a profound psychological exploration of prejudice, revenge, and identity. It's a story that absolutely refuses to give us a simple, cartoonish villain. Every single character carries a wound, and as we're about to see, every act of cruelty makes a terrible, dark kind of sense. Which brings us to Section 2, The Anatomy of Humiliation. We're going to shift our focus here from economics straight into psychology.
I mean, why does Shylock actually demand Antonio's flesh when the loan goes bad? Think about it. Economically, a pound of human flesh has zero value. None. It makes absolutely no sense for a moneylender to want this. But psychologically, it makes complete sense. Shylock doesn't want the flesh because he's just inherently evil. He wants it because he spent his entire life being marginalized, spit on, and treated as less than human. This contract is the one single moment where the law of Venice literally forces his oppressors to treat him as an absolute equal. To really wrap our heads around this, we can look at modern psychology. Psychologist James Gilligan spent decades, literally decades, studying the roots of violence. And his conclusion is pretty striking. He found that virtually all serious violence is rooted in one specific emotion: shame. Not anger, shame. So the big takeaway here is that humiliation isn't just some minor, fleeting feeling. It is a dangerous, incredibly potent psychological force. It drives publicly humiliated people to seek retribution, because in their minds, retribution is their only remaining form of dignity. Shylock's gruesome demand is simply the ultimate act of a shamed man demanding to finally be seen. And this shame is heavily compounded by a devastating personal loss. Shylock is experiencing total existential erasure. His daughter, Jessica, elopes with a Christian, a guy from the very group that oppresses her father. But she doesn't just leave him, she takes his money. She totally repudiates his religion, his culture, basically his entire identity. For Shylock, this isn't just a sad family dispute. This is an existential threat to his entire way of life. He's lost the very things that gave his life meaning. And that brings us to this incredible quote, which brilliantly illustrates his internal reality. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? When you really hear those words, it hits you. This isn't the speech of a monster. This is the profound agony of a man who has been broken by a lifetime of being told he simply doesn't count. It's his grief dressed up as cruelty, a wound so deep that it has entirely swallowed his identity. So when a person's identity faces an existential threat like that, they frequently bypass normal grief altogether. Instead, they enter this state of extreme psychological rigidity. They cling even harder to the one thing that still feels solid. For Shylock, digging his heels into the strict letter of the law isn't just him being stubborn, it's survival. The law has become his literal life raft in a world that is actively trying to erase him. Let's move on to Part 3, The Mask of Justice, and explore what happens when the system itself is fundamentally broken. Right at the play's climax, the courtroom scene looks like this sweeping victory for justice. Portia delivers what is, for sure, one of literature's most beautiful speeches, preaching all about the high virtues of mercy. But the applied reality? It's incredibly ugly. That beautiful, poetic mercy is entirely withheld from Shylock. He's legally stripped of his wealth, completely humiliated in a public court, and then forced, under threat of death, to convert to Christianity. Which really forces us to stop and ask, is justice truly just when it's applied selectively? Shakespeare is holding a giant mirror up to the audience here. He's asking if a legal or social system can ever actually produce fair outcomes when the very people operating it, like Antonio, like Portia, the supposed heroes, carry deeply unfair baked-in assumptions.
What we're really witnessing here is the psychological concept of projection. The Christian characters are actively projecting their own darkest fears, their own greed, their own cruelty, straight onto Shylock. The play quietly shows us that immense mercilessness exists on both sides. Antonio and Portia hold deep-seated prejudices, and their entire Venetian society is built entirely on systemic exclusion. Shylock isn't some outlier in this society. He's a mirror, reflecting its ugliest traits right back at it.
And that brings us to Section 4, the Mirror of Monsters. Let's look at the villainy you teach me and draw a direct line right into our modern lives.
This is arguably the most haunting line in the entire play. The villainy you teach me, I will execute. Shylock's ultimate tragedy wasn't that he was born a monster or that he was inherently evil. No, his tragedy is that a cruel, exclusionary society slowly and methodically shaped a human being into the exact monster they had always accused him of being. He simply became the story they told about him. And even though Shakespeare wrote this over 400 years ago, we're still watching this happen to individuals and communities every single day.
So let's bring this right back to you. Remember that person you labeled as difficult or unreasonable at the beginning of this explainer? Think about them again. If you could hear their full story, if you truly knew what they were fiercely protecting or what had been unfairly taken from them to make them so rigid, would your judgment change? Because honestly, behavior that we can't understand, we can't change.
And, what about our own wounds? Think of a grievance you are holding tightly onto right now. Is your fight genuinely about seeking fairness and justice? Or is it really just a desperate, completely human need for someone to finally acknowledge the pain they caused you? Sometimes we dress our grief up as a demand for justice. Furthermore, where in your own life are you applying mercy selectively? It's a tough pill to swallow, but consider if you, much like Portia and Antonio, naturally expect endless understanding and grace for your own mistakes, while completely withholding that exact same mercy from others who have wronged you.
Because at the end of the day, the most important takeaway from The Merchant of Venice isn't a debate about whether Shylock was right or wrong. The real question, the one that should be echoing in our minds long after this explainer ends, is this. What in our own lives are we allowing bitterness and humiliation to quietly turn us into? Are we executing the villainy we've been taught? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Take a moment to really reflect on these questions, and I'll catch you next time.